January 18, 1945. The winter wind cut through the shattered streets of a small German town. Smoke still curled from bombed-out homes, and the distant rumble of artillery reminded everyone that the front was only hours away. Inside a commandeered hospital, the corridors smelled of antiseptic, burnt wood, and fear. Flickering lanterns cast long shadows across pale, anxious faces. American officers moved deliberately through the ward, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning every detail. German nurses stood rigid, their hands trembling slightly as they clutched folded uniforms. Some were young, barely out of their teens, their faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. Others were older, hardened by years of war, yet the tension in their shoulders betrayed them. No one spoke. Only the scrape of shoes on stone floors and the soft hum of a heater filled the room. The officers paused at each bed, lifting sheets, inspecting bruises, tattoos, and marks hidden beneath layers of clothing. And then, the moment came that none of them could have prepared for, a quiet, forced revelation that would leave even the most stoic nurses breaking down in tears. The war outside these walls was brutal, but inside, a different battle for truth, shame, and survival had begun. January 1945. The Third Reich was in its final throes. The Eastern Front had collapsed under the relentless Soviet advance, while in the West, American and British forces were pushing through the Ardennes after the failed German counteroffensive. Cities lay in ruins. Transportation networks were shattered. German military commands struggled to maintain order, and the distinction between civilian and combatant had blurred. Hospitals, previously protected under international law, were now flooded with wounded soldiers, displaced civilians, and retreating personnel. Within this chaos, a hidden threat worried the Allies. Many German soldiers, particularly those affiliated with the SS, had attempted to vanish into civilian populations. Some sought refuge in medical facilities, counting on their uniforms, skills, or the assumed neutrality of hospitals to shield them. Tattoos, blood group markings, and other identifiers, often hidden beneath clothing, were key to revealing these SS members. The Allies, aware of the brutal ideology that SS units had enforced across occupied Europe, prioritized locating them before they could disappear. Medical personnel, especially nurses, were caught in a complex position. Many were trained professionals affiliated with the German Red Cross, bound by oaths of care and service. Yet in some cases, these same hospitals had treated SS personnel either unwillingly or under orders. Documents and testimonies later revealed that some nurses had unknowingly, or under duress, aided soldiers attempting to erase traces of their identity. Others were forced to treat wounded SS members, whose presence in civilian wards posed moral and operational dilemmas. American military strategy emphasized thorough investigation. Every medical facility in newly liberated towns or recently captured territory was subject to inspection. Officers carried detailed lists of wanted personnel, intelligence gathered from interrogations, and reports from local resistance networks. Nurses were asked to cooperate, not as accused criminals, but as witnesses whose knowledge could confirm the identities of hidden SS officers. For many, this meant exposing details they had hoped would remain secret. The presence of patients who had fought in atrocities, the knowledge of hidden tattoos, or even the simple recognition of a familiar uniform. Fear and shame permeated these wards. The nurses knew what disclosure could mean, not just for themselves, but for the men and women they had treated. A single acknowledgement could lead to arrests, trials, and the unraveling of an entire unit's network. Many feared reprisal from former colleagues or community members who still clung to Nazi loyalty. Others dreaded judgment from the advancing Americans, whose presence brought both liberation and scrutiny. The system of identification used by the Allies was meticulous. Tattoos on the forearm, blood-type stamps, surgical scars. Every mark had significance. SS members were sometimes identified by a small, coded tattoo on the upper arm. A circle enclosing runic symbols indicating their rank, unit, and ideological training. American officers, often trained in forensic documentation, examined these identifiers with the precision of an accountant tallying war crimes. The process was clinical, yet every discovery carried immense emotional weight, particularly for those nurses who had treated the men now revealed to be part of a regime responsible for systematic atrocities across Europe. This period highlighted the collision of two worlds: the professional, compassionate space of medical care and the brutal, ideologically driven reality of the SS. Nurses were human shields of sorts, caught between their duty to heal and the moral imperative to aid justice. The Americans' approach, firm yet methodical, forced this moral reckoning to the surface. In these hallways, the personal and political collided, and every examination carried consequences far beyond the sterile walls of the ward. The stage was set. Within the dim-lit corridors of hospitals, the war had entered its most intimate theater, not on bombed streets or snowy battlefields, but in quiet rooms where the human cost of ideology became visible. And it was here, under the watchful eyes of American officers, that the hidden truths of the SS would begin to emerge. As the Americans advanced deeper into Germany, hospitals became both sanctuaries and battlegrounds of information. German medical facilities, once strictly organized under military oversight, were now chaotic. Staff shortages, damaged infrastructure, and the constant influx of wounded soldiers created a tense environment. Among the staff, Red Cross nurses were particularly vulnerable. Their uniforms symbolized care and neutrality, but under the scrutiny of Allied forces, neutrality became ambiguous. The collapse of the Third Reich left many nurses in impossible positions. Some had been assigned to treat SS personnel directly, often without knowledge of their affiliations. Others had witnessed the aftermath of atrocities: corpses of concentration camp survivors, civilians injured in bombings, and soldiers returning from the front lines, their bodies marked by both combat and ideology. The ethical weight was immense. Nurses were bound by their duty to provide care, yet increasingly confronted with the moral consequences of serving those who had inflicted immense suffering. Many SS soldiers had attempted to erase their identifying marks. Tattoos were scrubbed or burned. Surgical scars were disguised with bandages or creams. Some had undergone crude medical procedures to remove evidence of affiliation. Nurses, as primary caregivers, were often the first to notice these alterations: subtle burn marks, uneven scars, or unusual bandaging. While some nurses remained silent out of fear, others kept meticulous mental records, understanding that disclosure might be demanded eventually. The American strategy relied on these observations, as every detail could point to the presence of hidden SS personnel. American military policy toward hospitals was methodical and uncompromising. Officers and forensic specialists conducted inspections with precise coordination. Patient records were cross-referenced with intelligence reports, and every anomaly was flagged for further investigation. Nurses were asked to recount which patients had received specific care, noting any irregularities or suspicious behavior. The pressure was intense. Many nurses faced direct questioning about wounds that could indicate prior identity mark removal or unusual treatment patterns. The room's tension grew with each inquiry, the nurse's loyalty to the Hippocratic oath clashing with the demand for justice. This environment highlighted the blurred line between civilian and combatant. Hospitals, intended as neutral zones, became arenas for moral confrontation. Nurses struggled with personal responsibility. How much did they know, and what would it mean to admit it? Confessions could lead to Allied scrutiny, arrests, or trials for aiding the enemy, while silence risked complicity in ongoing war crimes investigations. The psychological strain was immense. Eyewitness accounts from American officers later described nurses trembling, avoiding eye contact, and sometimes breaking into tears when pressed to reveal what they knew. The stakes were further heightened by the history of SS atrocities. The organization had committed systematic crimes across occupied Europe: mass executions, forced labor, and persecution of civilians. Any hidden SS member could represent not just an individual threat, but a living link to the machinery of genocide. American forces, tasked with securing post-war order and preparing for denazification, could not allow such personnel to evade accountability. The nurses' knowledge, once private, intimate, and tied to their professional duty, suddenly became a critical piece of the larger puzzle. Within these walls, the war's human toll was distilled into a single, wrenching reality. Care and cruelty had coexisted under the same roof. Every examination, every forced disclosure, revealed the hidden scars of ideology and conflict. Nurses were compelled to confront not only the physical evidence of the SS, but also their own emotional and ethical responses. Tear-streaked faces, whispered confessions, and silent glances became the currency of survival and accountability. By the time American officers completed their initial sweep of the hospitals, the nurses had been forced into a reckoning. The hidden SS marks, once concealed beneath layers of clothing and fear, were laid bare. The personal became historical, and the intimate theater of the hospital corridors mirrored the broader collapse of the Nazi regime. In this environment, the nurses' reactions, shock, fear, and tears, were not merely emotional responses. They were the first visible signs of the moral and practical unraveling of a world built on secrecy, violence, and enforced loyalty. The stage was now fully prepared for a deeper exploration. The multiple angles of this moment, the human, tactical, medical, moral, and leadership perspectives that converged to create one of the most emotionally charged scenes in the closing months of the European War. For the German nurses, the inspections were more than procedural checks. They were a confrontation with fear and conscience. Many were young women who had entered nursing school in 1942 or 1943, believing in the noble calling of healing, only to find themselves navigating the collapsing structures of a genocidal regime. By January 1945, their wards were filled with wounded soldiers, displaced civilians, and, at times, SS personnel attempting to hide their affiliations. The moment an American officer lifted a sleeve, revealing a faint tattoo or scar, it was a jolt to both memory and morality. Some nurses knew exactly what the marks signified. Others were only beginning to understand. The tension was visible in trembling hands, averted gazes, and silent sobs. For many, it was impossible to separate professional duty from complicity. The human toll of being forced to reveal these hidden identities, some of whom had caused immense suffering, was crushing. Tearful confessions were not rare. The physical and emotional exhaustion of the war amplified each revelation. In these moments, the nurses' humanity was laid bare. Their reactions reflected fear for their own futures, grief over the victims they had witnessed, and the overwhelming weight of moral responsibility. Even those who had never knowingly aided the SS felt the strain of association. The hospital became a stage where personal trauma intersected with historical reckoning. Angle 2, tactical, the Allied imperative. From a tactical standpoint, the American forces had clear objectives. The presence of SS personnel in civilian spaces posed significant risks: sabotage, intelligence leaks, or the perpetuation of Nazi ideology in occupied zones. Ensuring that every medical facility was free from hidden operatives was essential for both immediate security and long-term stabilization. The approach was systematic. Officers combined intelligence reports with direct observation. Every wound, scar, or burn was cataloged, cross-referenced with records, and evaluated for evidence of concealed SS affiliations. Nurses were key to this process. Their first-hand knowledge of patients, treatment histories, and unusual injuries provided critical intelligence. The stakes went beyond mere identification. Removing hidden SS members from civilian hospitals helped prevent potential uprisings, secured critical infrastructure, and reinforced the authority of Allied forces. It was a tactical necessity, executed under the scrutiny of military law, and carried out with procedural rigor that left little room for error. Angle 3. Medical, the forensic examination. The medical dimension of this operation was both technical and invasive. Allied medical officers were trained to recognize subtle identifiers, tattoos burned or obscured, surgical scars from crude attempts to remove markings, and the faint traces of chemical agents used to erase blood group symbols. The process required meticulous examination, often under the tense gaze of the nurses themselves. Nurses, who had spent months caring for patients, suddenly became witnesses to the physical traces of ideological affiliation. They were asked to recall which wounds might have been self-inflicted or deliberately altered, and which patients might have been trying to conceal their identities. Every observation had potential legal consequences, transforming routine care into forensic testimony. Medical examinations also revealed the improvisations SS personnel had used to hide themselves. Some had attempted minor surgery to obliterate tattoos, while others relied on long sleeves and bandages. American officers documented each anomaly carefully. For the nurses, this process was emotionally wrenching. Their familiarity with the patients collided with the legal and moral necessity to expose hidden truths, creating a unique form of professional and emotional tension. American officers approached the hospital inspections with a disciplined combination of authority and caution. Their objective was clear: identify any remaining SS personnel, document evidence, and maintain order in a chaotic environment. Officers were trained not only in tactical enforcement, but also in managing emotionally volatile situations. Leadership required balancing firmness with empathy. Nurses, exhausted and frightened, needed to understand that compliance was not an accusation, but a procedural necessity. Officers carefully coordinated the inspections, dividing responsibilities among intelligence specialists, medical examiners, and security personnel. This structured approach minimized confusion, ensuring that even the most subtle signs, tattoos, scars, or unusual injuries, were not overlooked. The presence of American authority was itself transformative. For many nurses, it was the first time since 1939 that an external power exercised oversight so directly within a hospital. Every command, every instruction, and every question carried a weight of accountability. Leaders had to maintain composure under the intense scrutiny of their own superiors while simultaneously navigating the emotional reactions of those they examined. Angle 5, Moral, the ethical dilemma. The moral dimension of these inspections was perhaps the heaviest burden. Nurses were caught between professional oaths and the stark realities of justice. They had pledged to care for the sick and wounded, regardless of affiliation. Yet many of those under their care had been part of an organization responsible for unimaginable atrocities. The dilemma was compounded by fear. Revealing a patient's SS affiliation could mean arrest, trial, or worse for the patient. But silence could implicate the nurse in aiding the enemy. Each decision, each answer to an officer's question, carried both ethical and personal consequences. Some nurses attempted to navigate this delicate balance with partial disclosure. Others broke down completely, unable to reconcile their duty with the overwhelming moral weight. This ethical tension created one of the most powerful human moments of the inspections. Tears, whispered confessions, and silent sobs became a form of testimony, as raw and revealing as any document. The nurses' struggle highlighted the impossibility of neutrality in a collapsed regime, where every act, even care, was inherently political. Angle 6, Enemy Perspective. SS soldiers in hiding. From the perspective of the hidden SS personnel, the hospital inspections represented imminent exposure and potential capture. Many had survived the Eastern Front or the Ardennes counteroffensive, only to find themselves vulnerable in supposed safe havens. Their tattoos, once marks of loyalty and pride, were now liabilities. SS soldiers had developed various strategies to conceal their identities. Some used bandages, long sleeves, or cosmetic measures. Others attempted minor surgical alteration. These improvisations were rarely perfect. Even the faintest scar or smudge of ink could betray affiliation under the scrutiny of American medical examiners. Fear dominated their behavior. The presence of American officers, combined with the knowledge that nurses might testify against them, created an atmosphere of constant anxiety. Some tried to manipulate the nurses, pleading ignorance or emphasizing compliance with the hospital's rules. Others remained silent, hoping their marks would remain undiscovered. The inspections forced these soldiers into a corner, revealing the human vulnerabilities behind the notorious facade of the SS. January 18, 1945, mid-morning. The American officers moved methodically through the wards, their footsteps echoing against the cold stone floors. Every bed was a potential revelation, every patient a possible SS operative hiding behind the facade of injury or illness. Nurses stood at attention, their hands clasped, faces pale, as the officers began the systematic examinations. The first revelation came with a lift of a sleeve. A faint, almost imperceptible tattoo appeared on a forearm, a small circle enclosing runic symbols. The officer paused, examined it with a magnifying lens, and jotted the identification number into his notebook. The nurse nearest the bed froze, her eyes filling with tears. She had treated this man for weeks, unaware, or perhaps in denial, of his true allegiance. The weight of knowing that she had cared for a member of an organization responsible for mass murder pressed on her chest like a physical force. One after another, patients were examined. Some revealed surgical scars where attempts had been made to remove markings. Others had tattoos obscured by bruising, chemical burns, or clever bandaging. Each discovery intensified the emotional strain. Nurses who had maintained composure for months found themselves trembling, unable to look officers in the eye. Whispered confessions began, admissions of knowledge, partial or full, about which patients had been assessed. A few nurses sank into chairs, covering their faces with trembling hands, unable to reconcile their professional duty with the revelation that they had unknowingly harbored the enemy. The Americans maintained calm efficiency. Officers spoke in measured tones, repeating questions carefully, ensuring that every mark was cataloged and every observation noted. The nurses' breakdowns did not alter procedure. They were witnesses to history being documented in real time. Their tears were quietly recorded, their reactions noted, their knowledge extracted with precision. The ward became a theater of moral confrontation. Even the most hardened nurses, those who had survived years of bombings, scarcity, and the relentless demands of wartime medical care, found themselves vulnerable. Some pleaded for leniency for the men they had cared for. Others simply sobbed silently, aware that the truth could neither be hidden nor avoided. For the first time, the war's human cost, its moral, emotional, and psychological toll, was tangible in the sterile light of hospital corridors. At the center of the ward, one nurse, a senior staff member who had overseen the care of dozens of wounded, was confronted with multiple patients whose markings had been partially erased. She was forced to recount every detail she remembered, treatments administered, locations of bandages, and moments when patients had exhibited unusual behavior. Her voice quivered, then faltered, and finally broke entirely. The officers recorded her testimony without interruption, understanding that this breakdown was part of the process, not a disruption. This was not an isolated incident. Across the hospital, the same patterns emerged. Fear, guilt, exhaustion, and grief intertwined in a moment of intense revelation. Nurses had to reconcile months of caregiving with the reality that they had been inadvertently sheltering the perpetrators of atrocities. The American officers' methodical approach ensured that no detail was overlooked. Every mark exposed, every confession recorded, became part of the meticulous documentation that would later serve as evidence in post-war trials. By mid-afternoon, the inspections had revealed the first major cluster of hidden SS members. Officers confirmed identities, documented scars, and cross-referenced records with intelligence gathered from other towns and liberated regions. The nurses, emotionally drained, had borne witness to this revelation, their tears an unspoken acknowledgement of the complex moral terrain they navigated. The hospital corridors, once a place of care, had become a crucible where fear, duty, and history converged. The stage was now set for the full unraveling. The moment when the American officers would confront the remaining hidden SS members, and the final truths of who had concealed their identities and how would be revealed. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the hospital corridors, the intensity of the inspections reached its peak. The American officers moved with relentless precision, examining each bed, each patient, and every subtle clue that could betray an SS affiliation. Nurses, now visibly exhausted, hovered near their stations, their faces pale and drawn. The weight of the revelations pressed on them like a tangible force, each moment carrying the possibility of exposing someone they had once cared for. The first confrontation of the final phase occurred in Ward B. A wounded man had been receiving treatment for several days, his forearm hidden beneath heavy bandages. Officers carefully removed them, revealing a scarred, partially obliterated tattoo. The markings were unmistakable. The man froze, his eyes darting toward the nurses who had tended him. One nurse, hands shaking, whispered the truth she had been holding. He was in the SS training camp near Dresden. I treated him after the skirmish. Her voice broke mid-sentence. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing fear, guilt, and relief that the truth was finally out. Similar discoveries unfolded throughout the hospital. Some patients had attempted to disguise tattoos with soot or crude ointments. Others had undergone minor surgical procedures in desperate attempts to erase identifying marks. American officers, trained in forensic documentation, methodically recorded each anomaly, cross-referencing patient names, unit numbers, and historical intelligence. Nurses were compelled to recount every detail they remembered: the timing of treatments, the nature of injuries, and the unusual precautions some patients had taken. The emotional toll was immense, and several nurses were seen retreating to corners, quietly weeping. The American officers also faced tense confrontations with those identified as SS members. Some attempted to lie, minimize, or feign ignorance. A few became defiant, maintaining silence or casting accusing glances at the nurses. Yet under the unwavering scrutiny of officers and the meticulous documentation of medical evidence, the truth emerged. Names, affiliations, and prior assignments were confirmed, leaving no ambiguity. The officers maintained composure, recording each detail with clinical detachment, aware that these findings would later play a pivotal role in denazification and war crime proceedings. For the nurses, this moment was transformative. The tears that had begun in quiet corners now became a visible symbol of the moral reckoning that had overtaken the hospital. They were not simply reacting to authority. They were confronting the stark reality of a regime's collapse, the human cost of concealed loyalty, and their own participation, however unwitting, in the care of individuals responsible for atrocities. The emotional weight of these revelations rippled through the hospital, touching every staff member and patient who witnessed them. By late afternoon, the final tally of confirmed SS personnel within the hospital was complete. Each case had been meticulously documented, every concealment exposed. The inspections revealed not just the presence of hidden operatives, but the broader network of deception and survival strategies employed by SS soldiers as the Reich crumbled. The nurses, now exhausted but resolute, had borne witness to history in its rawest form. Their knowledge, tears, and testimony became integral to the process of accountability and justice that would unfold in the months ahead. The ward, once a place of quiet care and routine, had transformed into a crucible of truth. The convergence of fear, moral conflict, and forensic scrutiny created a singular moment where human emotion and historical consequence intersected. Nurses, patients, and officers alike would remember these hours, not as a procedural inspection, but as a profound reckoning with the consequences of ideology, war, and concealed identity. The discoveries in the hospital set the stage for the broader aftermath. Beyond the walls of the medical wards, arrests would be made, interrogations conducted, and post-war trials informed by the meticulous documentation of hidden SS members. The emotional and operational consequences of these revelations would ripple across the occupied territories, shaping the first months of denazification and influencing the moral and legal reckoning of Germany itself. The immediate consequences of the hospital inspections were profound. Within hours, American officers had identified a significant number of hidden SS personnel, each case meticulously documented for further action. Arrests followed swiftly, executed with precision to prevent panic or resistance. Nurses, still recovering from the emotional toll, were called upon to provide statements that corroborated the physical evidence. Their testimony, detailing tattoos, scars, and patient histories, became central to confirming identities and linking individuals to past atrocities. The emotional aftermath for the nurses was intense. Many were overwhelmed by guilt and relief simultaneously. They had fulfilled their professional duties, yet the knowledge that they had unwittingly sheltered agents of a brutal regime weighed heavily. Some nurses were temporarily reassigned to quieter wards to recover, while others remained to assist with the ongoing processing of patients and documentation. Letters and later interviews revealed that several nurses described these days as among the most harrowing of their careers. The war's destruction, once abstract or distant, had become deeply personal in the corridors of the hospital. American officers faced their own challenges in managing the aftermath. While the operational objective, identifying hidden SS personnel, had been achieved, maintaining order and morale in the hospital required sensitivity. Officers ensured that nurses were given space to recover and provided support to manage the psychological toll of their involvement. Security measures were intensified, and remaining patients were closely monitored. The process of documenting and arresting SS members required careful coordination with military intelligence, legal advisors, and local authorities. The impact extended beyond individual wards. Neighboring hospitals and medical facilities were placed under heightened scrutiny. News of the inspections spread quickly among German medical staff, creating an atmosphere of tension and apprehension. The revelations served as a warning. No facility could hide its personnel or obscure the presence of SS members. Nurses and staff became conduits of both information and morality, their observations now instrumental in the broader effort to dismantle remnants of the Nazi apparatus. These early actions set the tone for the months that followed. Immediate arrests and interrogations provided crucial intelligence on SS operations and personnel movements. The careful documentation of hidden marks, tattoos, and patient histories became foundational evidence for denazification tribunals and war crimes investigations. The hospital inspections were not merely procedural. They were a microcosm of the larger process of justice, accountability, and moral reckoning sweeping through occupied Germany. The emotional resonance of the events lingered long after the officers left the hospital. Nurses reported recurring nightmares, flashbacks of revealing hidden tattoos, and vivid memories of patients who had been SS members. Many described the act of testifying as a form of catharsis, a release of the tension that had built over months of caregiving under fear and uncertainty. Their tears during the inspections were emblematic not only of personal anguish, but also of the moral and emotional burden imposed by a collapsing regime. In a larger context, the immediate aftermath demonstrated the critical importance of combining forensic precision with human sensitivity. American officers had achieved a significant operational victory, identifying and detaining hidden SS members, while simultaneously navigating the fragile psychological state of nurses who had been unwitting participants in the concealment of the enemy. The events highlighted the complex interplay between duty, morality, and survival, a dynamic that would continue to shape interactions in hospitals and occupied zones throughout early 1945. In the weeks following the inspections, the consequences rippled far beyond the hospital walls. Arrested SS personnel were transferred to Allied detention centers, where interrogations revealed detailed information about units, movements, and war crimes. Evidence gathered from the hospital, tattoos, scars, and nurse testimonies became a critical component of denazification tribunals and post-war trials. Each documented case added to the growing mosaic of accountability, helping allies distinguish between civilians, coerced participants, and committed perpetrators. For the nurses, the aftermath was both professional and deeply personal. Many faced continued scrutiny from Allied authorities, who needed to confirm their cooperation and verify the accuracy of their observations. While some were commended for their meticulous testimony, others grappled with lingering self-reproach. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal recurring themes. The haunting memory of patients whose hidden allegiance had been revealed, the guilt of unintentional complicity, and the profound relief that justice was being pursued. Their tears, once a raw response during inspections, became a symbol of the emotional reconciliation with the moral complexities they had endured. The hospital itself underwent changes. American forces implemented stricter protocols for patient intake, identification, and record-keeping, ensuring that no individual could hide affiliations unnoticed. Staff rotations were adjusted to minimize the risk of inadvertent concealment, and documentation processes were formalized. The facility, once a chaotic environment in the final months of the war, became a controlled center for verification and monitoring, reflecting the broader Allied efforts to stabilize occupied territories and enforce justice. Beyond the immediate facility, the inspections sent a message throughout occupied Germany. Hospitals, clinics, and even small medical outposts understood that concealment of SS affiliation would not go unnoticed. The moral and operational lessons were clear. Neutrality in service of the enemy carried consequences, and collaboration, voluntary or coerced, would be scrutinized. This awareness reshaped behavior in medical facilities, influencing both staff conduct and patient disclosure in the final months of the conflict. In historical retrospect, these inspections illustrate the dual nature of post-war justice. They were both pragmatic and symbolic. Pragmatic in identifying hidden operatives who could threaten security, symbolic in confronting the moral realities of complicity, duty, and human responsibility. The nurses' emotional responses underscore that justice is never solely a legal or procedural exercise. It is a deeply human endeavor, intertwined with grief, fear, and ethical reckoning. By early 1945, the cumulative effect of these inspections contributed to a broader understanding of the operational and ideological networks of the SS. Documentation from hospitals provided tangible proof for tribunals, informed intelligence reports, and shaped policies for post-war administration. For the individuals involved, the nurses, the patients, and the officers, the events marked a turning point in awareness, responsibility, and accountability. Their experiences became a testament to the intersection of human emotion, professional duty, and historical consequence. The revelations within the hospital corridors, the meticulous documentation, and the tearful confessions had set the stage for reflection. Beyond the arrests and operational outcomes, there remained a deeper question. What did these events signify for Germany, for the medical profession, and for the moral conscience of those who had endured the collapse of the Reich? This question would resonate as the war drew to a close, preparing the ground for a final, contemplative closure. The events of January 1945 in the hospital corridors of Germany were more than procedural inspections. They were a reckoning. Nurses, once shields of care and neutrality, had become witnesses to the hidden machinery of a regime collapsing under its own weight. The tears they shed were not simply emotional reactions. They were the embodiment of moral confrontation, the human response to a world where duty and complicity had collided. In revealing hidden SS affiliations, the Americans exercised authority with methodical precision, yet the true power of these inspections lay in their human dimension. Nurses faced impossible choices: to speak or remain silent, to preserve life or aid justice. Their courage, measured not in weapons or strategies, but in honesty and resilience, became a quiet testament to the weight of conscience. Each disclosed tattoo, scar, or concealed mark was more than evidence. It was a revelation of history, etched onto flesh and memory alike. The aftermath of these revelations shaped the course of post-war justice. Arrests, interrogations, and documentation fed into tribunals that would define the moral and legal framework of denazification. The lessons extended beyond legality. They were about accountability, the responsibility of witnesses, and the enduring challenge of ethical decision-making in times of chaos. Hospitals, once assumed to be neutral zones, became arenas where truth and morality intersected, reminding the world that even spaces of care are inseparable from the larger currents of history. Ultimately, the nurses' tears were both personal and symbolic. They reflected the human cost of ideology, the strain of professional duty under impossible conditions, and the quiet reckoning of individuals caught in the sweep of history. In their vulnerability lay resilience. In their grief, a profound acknowledgement of truth. The hidden SS marks, once concealed beneath layers of clothing and secrecy, became visible not only to American officers, but to the historical record itself. A lasting testament to the collision of war, duty, and conscience. The corridors of that hospital, filled with fear, discovery, and sorrow, stand as a reminder. History is not only written in battles and treaties, but also in the quiet, tearful moments when ordinary individuals confront extraordinary moral and human challenges.